Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Talent Playbook Podcast. My name is Jason Ferrara. I'm the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at OutMatch and your host for the podcast. Our podcast focuses on strategies for transforming your world of work. During each podcast, we highlight someone who's transformed their organization or industry in a significant way. And today's guest is Chris Gardner, the Chief Technology Officer at OutMatch. So, with full disclosure, obviously I work with Chris, but I wanted him on the podcast because he's such a great example of a business-focused and strategy-focused CTO. He cares about the technical aspects of the CTO job, but his main focus is making sure that our business runs efficiently and serves our customers effectively. In this podcast, you'll hear how an HR tech-focused CTO thinks an IT team should be run and the types of people that are best for that team. How the new GDPR regulations impact HR tech in the larger world. How a development team should be connected to the end user and the way that Chris does that with his team. And how he employs agile software development methodology, how he modifies those principles for OutMatch. And we talk a little bit about broadening agile methodology out to other areas of a business, not just the technology team. Chris has a big job, and that job covers a lot of ground. And he tells us in some pretty rich detail about that job and all the things he does. So because of that, I think you'll really enjoy this conversation with Chris, enjoy his insight. So without further delay, here's the Talent Playbook Podcast with Chris Gardner. Hey, Chris, thanks for joining the podcast today. Appreciate it that you're here and willing to talk.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. So what I'd like to do for our listeners first is have you describe your job and how long you've been doing this job, just so they get an understanding of you and your skills and your role.
Sure. Let's see. I'll start with the easy one. I've been doing this job for a little over 6 years now here at OutMatch, and what I'm responsible for here is everything associated with OutMatch's technology delivery. I tend to think about that in three main ways, I guess. We're responsible for developing new products and our solutions or new features for products that we already offer. Once those products are delivered, we have to support them, maintain them, operate them for our customers in our production data center environments. And then the last thing is we need to host an infrastructure and operate a secure, computing and networking environment for both that production infrastructure as well as our pre-production environments and our back office, which is basically all the different computing environments that we have just to do our jobs at OutMatch, and so all of our employees can do their jobs to deliver services to customers. So those kind of three pillars are the things that I think about every day, and the IT team here at OutMatch is responsible for. And then I have a kind of a newer role, which is Data Privacy Officer, which I is kind of ancillary to my job. As the privacy landscape globally has evolved, that's become a big need for our business, and especially with GDPR coming out, that's been a focus of mine as well. And in that role, really responsible for our privacy policy, the processes and other policies we have to secure data for our customers and our end users of our product, and any work around that.
Cool. So it's not, yeah, it completely makes sense to me, mainly because I work with you every day. But so a couple of follow-up questions to that. One is just give us a brief explanation of GDPR. I think some listeners might know exactly what that is, and some might not. So give us a quick update there, if you would.
Sure. Yes, the GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a regulation in the European Union that just came about earlier this year. The law took effect, and the European Union had, prior to that law taking effect, a guideline. It was called a General Data Protection Directive, which really goes. It was treated more as a guideline for each individual EU member state to set laws in their own countries that were somewhat consistent with that larger guideline. And these are laws around the protection of EU residents' personal information. And this year, the law went into effect that really unified that across all of the EU. So instead of all the different member states having their own individual laws, now there's just one law, which is actually a really good thing for all of us in industries that do process any sort of personal information or personal data of an EU resident, because it helps us really know that there's only one law that we need to pay attention to instead of the many laws of the many EU member states. So the law is designed to protect individuals' personal data and to give them some rights when it comes to that data, around how that data can be used, how they provide consent to use the data that they do submit to companies for processing and for use, and their ability to kind of revoke those rights, take that data back, to know what data a company might have on them, because sometimes it gets a little unruly if companies can accumulate lots of data over time. They can move that data from one company to another in certain circumstances, and they can request that it all be purged and removed from a company's system if they would like. So that's the general sense of it. There's a lot of discussion, obviously, right now in different industries. The social media space is probably the biggest one, where these regulations are going to, they're in some ways already transforming how those businesses have to operate.
And is that just in the EU? Does it have implications in the US or China or Japan or any other country around the world?
Yeah, it definitely does. That's a great question. All of the I guess the internet makes the world a very small place when it comes to personal data. So European residents' information can certainly be processed by a company in any geography. So it absolutely applies to, say, OutMatch as a US-based company, and it would apply equally as much to companies in Japan or any of those other regions that you mentioned. It really doesn't matter where in the world your company does business. If you pull the data in and process the data from a European Union resident, then the law applies to you as well.
Yeah. So you weren't born knowing this information. So how long did you? Maybe you were. I don't know. You're pretty good with it. How long were you? Did you have to study up on this? Where did you learn about GDPR? I mean, obviously, to execute that across the OutMatch technologies, you have to be pretty familiar with it. So how did you get all this knowledge about it?
Yeah, a lot of reading. It's not the most exciting subject for most people necessarily, but it's an important one. So a lot of it was reading and research. Definitely attending some. I went and attended some webinars and other in-person kind of conference-related type sessions to give information, and then we engaged with third parties here at OutMatch that helped us learn more about our requirements under the law and to do readiness and risk assessments so that we could identify places where we were totally prepared and ready to go, and in other places where we needed to do some shoring up. And through that process, I really learned a ton about the law, probably more than I really thought I would have to know, but I do have to say I think it's been valuable exercise to go through, and especially watching it now take effect and watching some of these other larger companies that process tons more data react to it. It's kind of good to understand how it works. So that's actually been beneficial.
Yeah. And we do have resellers and other in European countries, right? So they're looking at us for help. They have to be a part of this law, right? So they're looking to us to conform with the law, right?
Certainly, resellers and then our customers and our prospects are really asking a lot of good questions. I spend time with them either during the sales process or after after the law's taken effect in an existing customer. Just as we went through that readiness, they're also going through their own internal processes and procedures to see, are they affected by this? What kind of data do they have? And especially the global companies, really, large global corporations or those with a big EU presence are really diving into this in detail, and then they'll have questions certainly for us because even though it's a very small amount of data that we do process, that we're a part of a larger HR business process that may involve more data. So as they're mapping those processes out, they have to understand each of their vendors and what data they process and how that's all stitched together, so that if they have to react to one of these individual rights management requests from an end data subject, an EU resident, that they can properly process for that, and they have to make sure they have a legal basis to actually process the data that they're collecting, all those things. So I'd say our customers are also getting very well versed in the law and how it affects them, for sure.
Yeah, I'm making notes here while we talk. You brought up a number of different things I want to follow up on because it's super, super interesting about not only this law, but your job and that sort of thing. So you mentioned that this type of stuff comes up in the sales process. And I want to get back to the idea that you're the Chief Technology Officer at OutMatch, and you just listed out three things that are really your core functions there, right? Building new products and features, supporting and maintaining those, and then hosting that infrastructure. And nowhere in those three things did you mention the sales process, but you just talked about your involvement in the sales process. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the CTO role and its use in the sales process, and what your involvement in the sales process really looks like.
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixture. Most of the time when I'm involved in sales, it has to do with two things. I would lump that privacy into a larger discussion around security. Larger enterprise customers, which we work with regularly, often have teams of people whose job it is to assess the security of any new vendor that they're coming on, if data is going to be processed. So they're very good at asking a series of kind of prescribed questions that they have for all of their vendors. I'll often get involved in conversations in the sales cycle with those people that are in charge of kind of articulating the risk or assessing the risk of a new vendor, and answer questions about our security and our data protection that we have here at OutMatch, just to put their minds at ease or help them follow through with that process. That's one category. Another big category where there are often a lot of questions, our customers, because we're most often dealing with the recruiting side of the business or the selection side of the business, and we're doing that in high volume. So maybe most of them have applicant tracking systems that they use to manage the high volume of applicants that they have and who's at what stage of their recruiting workflow. It helps quite a bit that our software integrates in fairly seamlessly with those applicant tracking systems. So the candidate experience is very uniform. They don't really realize that they're moving from system to system. They just consider the application and the assessment kind of all part of one larger workflow for the candidate. And then similarly for the recruiter who's working in that system, they can access the reports that we produce on candidates through directly inside the ATS. So that's what we call an integration between our system and an applicant tracking system. And there are often questions about that experience, or we might work closely with a new applicant tracking system. If it's one that we haven't integrated with before, we may have a conversation as part of a pre-sales or a sales discussion around the compatibility of the two systems and how we would integrate them together. Those are probably the two biggest times that I'm involved, as well as at the contract stage, I guess would be the third time, is that there'll be then, when it moves to a contract, there'll be insertions or red lines on a contract in certain cases, and anything related to data security or privacy or the GDPR, any of those areas, those are my responsibility to review and make sure that we're all going to be able to agree to the terms in the contract.
Yeah. So I know you're not a one-man gang. So tell me a little about your team, because I think also the things that you're describing are, obviously it's a broad scope of responsibility, but the things you're describing also require specialization in and of themselves. So tell us a little bit about the team that you manage, and I'll try to pull all this back together in one bigger question. But I'm interested to know now, like, what's the team look like that you manage?
Yeah.
How do you get all this work done?
Well, it's a great team. We have probably 20-25 people right now inside our IT organization here at OutMatch. So it's a large percentage of the company in terms of the technology investment that we make in our products, which makes sense for a SaaS business like we have. We're really divided largely right now along the same three lines that I mentioned at the top of our discussion. So development of new products and features, there is a segment of the IT organization that's in charge of that. So that consists of developers. Those are people who are actually writing code. It consists of business analysts and project managers that are in charge of gathering requirements and presenting those to a development team so that they can create the new feature or function, and keeping that team moving. It would consist of quality assurance team members who test after that code is written. They test that the product is working properly, or those requirements were met properly. That's kind of what we would consider a product development team, and we have a few of those that run to develop new products and features. Then we have a couple teams whose responsibility is that to take that finished product and deliver it or operate it out in our production environment for our customers, and to provide closer support for those customers on a day-to-day basis. We just choose to segment that way. Not every IT organization does, but we divide that line so that our product development team can focus on new features almost 100% of the time. And then that delivery and support team takes receipt of that code that's finished, and they deploy it to production, so it's out there and it's working in our end environment for our customers. And then as our customers are using it, if they have questions, or if there's a problem report that needs to be investigated, or there's a more hands-on communications with end customers or with partners, like the applicant tracking system partners we mentioned a minute ago, that team of people is really responsible for interfacing with them. So they're kind of keeping the lights on and keeping everything running properly day in and day out for the released code. And then the last team we have is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, finish your thought, thanks.
Yeah, the last team we have is that infrastructure team, which is a team of people whose job it is to just make sure that all of our compute infrastructure, the networking, so I'm talking about all of our servers and everything that really, where we host all the software day in, day out. They maintain that, database administration, all our backups and the security, all our firewalls, everything that protects the environment and keeps it up and running day in and day out. That's what we call our infrastructure, and that's our infrastructure team that keeps that stuff running smoothly. Those are the three kind of teams of people that we have. And then I have in each of those major disciplines, architecture, quality assurance, project or program management, infrastructure. I have a lead that helps run those specific areas and constantly improve on how those teams of people are working together.
Got it. Okay, so how do you and the rest of your team, and if you're responsible for building and delivering the software that the people who hire other people use, so how do you and your team stay connected with the customer, right? And the issues in the market? So I know you just described a certain group of people on the team who do that, but I mean, presumably a developer has to understand what they're developing and what the customer wants in order to do that successfully. So how does your team stay connected with the customer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do that through a couple means. The primary means that we have for that is through our product management function here at OutMatch. Our product management team doesn't sit directly inside of technology. They are an independent, group outside of technology, but we work with that team extremely closely. And that team's job is really to keep their finger on the pulse of the market, whether it's new sales and new opportunities and what we're hearing from those prospects, those potential customers in terms of their needs and how those needs might cause our platform to evolve, or it could be other innovations that they're seeing in the market or in our industry that we want to explore. Could be talking to current customers about their problems and how those problems could lead to opportunities for us to offer solutions. I really look to that team to coalesce input from all those different sources into a roadmap, what we call a roadmap, product development roadmap for our offering. And obviously we have people in leadership roles in sales and in customer success and account management. So those people are really experts in what is happening day in and day out, and they're providing that input too. The product management team is really the one team that I look to again to coalesce and bring all that together into a vision for how the platform needs to evolve from a capabilities perspective.
Yeah,
they're our first source.
How typical is this structure? So the structure you describe on the IT team and the product management team, how typical is that structure among SaaS companies?
That's a good question. All the roles that I mentioned within an IT organization, like development and QA and an infrastructure team, those are always there. They're typical. Sometimes, in a very small company, you might find that some of those roles are, people are wearing multiple hats and they're fulfilling, I've heard of very, very small companies, of course, where maybe they don't have a formal QA team, quality assurance team, but there are people who are testing every release because they're all huddled around the laptops before release, and that's their job for the day.
Yeah, yeah.
In larger companies, or as you have larger and larger customers, enterprise customers, I think the expectation shifts quite a bit in terms of the quality of the product and the uptime and other things, and that begins to become a more formal role as well as other roles that we have. So I think for a company our size, and certainly the customer base that we service, we have all those typical IT disciplines represented, and that's a pretty common thing. Not every not every organization might choose to kind of think about it in those three pillars that I and our team have kind of self-organized ourselves into to be most effective. And certainly but we didn't always operate this way here at OutMatch. We weren't always organized exactly that same way. So that's kind of evolved. How the teams are organized to get that work done and to stay focused in those particular areas is definitely something that evolves over time. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as we continue to grow, if that doesn't shift again, someday, who knows?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you got into this field, right? I mean, I'm looking at my notes, and you've got like this technical aspect of either developing code yourself or managing people who do, right? Managing a large team, so you got to understand personnel management and understand a process and do research and learn and think about strategy. And these are all like each one of these things could be a separate discipline. So how did you get started in this line of work? How did you, was it college? Was it before that? Was it always something you wanted to do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I fell into it a little bit. Frankly, my background is engineering, mechanical engineering, not computer science. And my first job, I wasn't doing anything related to software, really. I was a process engineer in a microelectronics factory, which is another story. But it was very much, we were building hardware, not software. And but one of the jobs that I had there was to try to make each a step in that assembly, that manufacturing process, as efficient as possible to keep the cost down, have that process go as fast as it could, and to be as high as quality as possible. That would mean that kind of each component that went through this factory would, you'd increase your chances of success that it would get through defect-free 100% of the time, or as much as possible, and that kept your costs down and improve the yield. And one of my jobs there was to model that and predict how a new design would affect the cost, right? What parameters about the design of these microelectronic components might be lower quality or trigger higher defect rates or be more time consuming to produce. How could I predict the cost of this as it went through the factory? And I started modeling a lot of the parameters that we figured out affected cost or quality. I started modeling that first it was spreadsheets, and I kind of worked my way up to tinkering around and figuring out, okay, how could I build some software that could be used to do this? And that's when I realized I really enjoyed software, because it was considerably faster to build something and to kind of ask a program to do something than it was to build a piece of hardware.
Yeah.
3D printing, that's a little bit different today, but
that wasn't always available, right?
Exactly. It certainly wasn't back then. So I always felt it was really cool that you could tell the software to do something and it would immediately do it. You could change something if you didn't like it, or if it was not working properly, you make a quick change and it's working again. I've since learned that it takes a long time to build software, but that was what attracted me to it.
Right.
And I went from there to just kind of lucked out to be able to use some of the project management skills that I had and other things at that process engineering job at a startup. And that was not a SaaS business necessarily, but it was a kind of a business process outsourcing business that had a heavy software component. And from there, I was able to move into the software side of things and the software management, team management side. So it's kind of how I fell into it.
Wow,
luck.
That's cool. Thanks for describing that. So, like, if you were to describe a day in the life today, I mean, are you, do you have active decisions in all these areas of the business, or is it, you find yourself really thinking about and working on specific things? What's that day in the life look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty lucky in that respect, I think, because most days my day is very diverse in that I do spend I do get to touch on a lot of those different areas in the course of a given day. Um, my days are pretty packed with meetings or discussions. I'd say a typical week is 75% meetings, maybe. Um, but there's such a large number of simultaneous activities going on, both inside of IT, where we're having, with any of those three disciplines, we're often working with product management, as I mentioned, because not only are we worried about the software that we're building today or the features or functions that we're building today and how we're doing executing on those, but we're also planning for the next thing, because and this is probably my process engineering background, but in my manufacturing background, but I think of our team, especially the part of our team that's responsible for new features, as a bit of an assembly line. And they need requirements. They need to know kind of what are these new features that the product management team is thinking of and prioritizing. That has to be taken from a back of the napkin idea into something that can be understood, ultimately that can be understood technically in terms of how we're going to approach building that. And there's quite a few steps in between to take it from conceptual, design to actual real design in production. So that's a lot of my time. My days begin with usually begin with a stand-up, which is a meeting. It's kind of a ritual meeting that you have in a software development environment like ours, where everything that's getting worked on, there's one or more representatives from each of those different teams that I mentioned in that meeting, and they're kind of giving a status of what happened yesterday, what's happening today, are there any blockers, which is the biggest thing I'm concerned about. If there's something that's preventing progress, then we need to get that cleared as quickly as we can so that they can be back up and running. So that's how we kick the day off. And then after that, it's a host of other things. And then again, I could be working with customers or sales support or any number of other kind of more strategic things during the day as well.
Yeah, I've spoken with lots of people about starting the day with a stand up, and my team does that as well. It's just such first of all, I think it's a great way to get grounded in the day, but it's also a great way to, like you talking about blockers, they're just things you don't see unless someone brings them up. I'm sure that's a big part of what you and your team talk about, right? Making sure that there aren't blockers and how to deal with the ones that crop up.
Yeah, it's that and kind of the readiness or preparedness. So in these meetings, we can look, and in other meetings, we can look out ahead and see what work is coming and what is the state of that work. Is that work ready to be consumed by the team, or is it not, in terms of like defining a requirement? So it's quite helpful. Yeah, that stand-up is so helpful, because if there's something that, it's literally like a wrench in the machine. If there's a blocker, the whole team can't proceed at times if it's significant enough, and we need to stop and figure out how to get them back up and running as quickly as we can. Otherwise, it throws off a lot of progress. And they're setting their own goals. We have units of work called sprints, where it's a fixed period of time. They want to get as much done as they can. The team sets goals at the beginning of every sprint, and they want to hit those goals. And so it's our job to kind of help them as much as we can to help them succeed there, for sure.
Yeah. So concepts like stand up and use the word sprint, right? I would define those as terms, agile software methodology terms. So does your team subscribe to agile software methodology? Do you is that something that everybody understands? Do you try to get other teams within the company to think about that? What do you do with Agile?
Yeah, so it's a little bit, I'd say, of a hybrid version. For the most part, I would consider us Agile. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right. Those are Agile terms and kind of quote unquote rituals that go with the Agile development process. The different teams that we have, those product development teams, definitely work in an Agile manner. Then as you move into the customer support and delivery support type of a role,
Mm-hmm.
we begin to shift out of Agile a tiny bit into a little bit different methodology. What I'd say in general that I love about Agile and some of the related development methodologies is that they're very malleable. You really don't have to follow them to the letter of the law or someone's published kind of definition or what
Mm-hmm.
a book says. And that's very much part of our kind of culture as a team, is we try to improve on how we work together if we see an opportunity to do it just a little bit better. So I'd say we're grounded in Agile for sure. That was how we kind of got our start, but we've taken the parts that work well for us and used those. The parts that don't work great, we definitely have modified. I'd say we do maybe more than a lot of other pure Agile shops. We still do a little bit more work up front in terms of requirements gathering and that massaging that I talked about earlier, to make sure that we're really prepared for the team to go quickly than maybe a pure play Agile shop might do.
Mm-hmm.
That may be one important difference. I will say, you asked about other parts of the organization, even outside of IT. Yeah, there's definitely, like you mentioned, that's great to hear that your team does a stand-up. I think that they're designed to be quick, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The larger the group, we do kind of a group of groups, so ours takes a little longer at times, especially if there's blockers or decisions that need to be made. But I just think that is every single team in the company or in almost any business could take advantage of some of those practices just to be more successful. So you definitely cherry pick the things that work well for you, but that's a great way to be informed and in touch about what's going on across your organization quickly.
Yeah, and in order to get out of making decisions, sometime I just tell people I'm delaying decisions as long as possible, and drawing on the principles of Agile just to give myself some more time to figure it out.
Yeah, the last possible moment.
Right.
Yeah, make that decision.
Yeah, there's a policy
exactly.
behind it. Yeah, a framework. So let's talk a little bit more about your team. So what are the kinds of people, the people who are most successful on your team? What are their characteristics? What are they like? What do you want to see in an employee that you hire for your team?
That's a good question. There certainly is going to be in the technology space a certain amount of technical skill that's required, and depending on the role that's being played, right? And so if you take a developer, they're going to have skill in coding in the languages that we need to understand. We don't code in just any syntax. Like most companies, we try to narrow it down to a standard set so that everyone can speak the same language and execute that way.
Right.
We have a few of those, but those skills are important. Or if it's, let's take quality assurance, there's skill sets there in terms of how to look at a set of requirements and really understand how to test that very thoroughly to make sure that it meets the requirement. Because sometimes these requirements are spelled out and it's very clear that, what you need to test, but then there's often kind of hidden conditions or maybe some edge cases or what we might call negative testing, where you're really trying to kind of take a path through the application that you don't expect a user to take and and make sure it works. So a great tester is really going to be able to think through a lot of different scenarios and how to design a effective set of tests to be sure that the application is going to work properly. In each of those cases, I'd say those are kind of domain specific skills that everybody has to have. It's not unlike any other job out there. I'd say past that, the things that, you know, I really look for that differentiate super successful employees are, you know, they're a little along the lines of the values that we have, right? Believe it, own it, improve it are our values, but really looking for people with this insatiable desire to solve a problem, who kind of have a natural curiosity about how something works or should work, and they're really not going to let go until they get that problem solved, right? Just like the problem gnaws at them until it's resolved, and they're constantly striving to improve. So if maybe they're just a little bit dissatisfied, not in a negative way really, but there's, you know, they're always kind of thinking there's a little bit better job that we could have done there, we could have done this a little faster, we could have done whatever, you know, those are the people that are really driving the rest of the organization to improve. They're really committed and own it. Those are the things that really differentiate the most successful people, in my mind, in the company. We have this 1% improvement kind of mantra that we use sometimes, especially myself and people, my directs, which we got from, I think, the French cycling team or some article I read a long time ago, which is really interesting, which is, you know, they really didn't set about to break records or to shatter records in any one performance. It was about a series of very tiny improvements over time that compound to really improve the performance to the team overall. And that struck that resonated with me, and something that I like to see people thinking in that way. Like, how could we tweak this and make it just a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a great concept, right? It's not, you're probably not going to find you lift up the cover and you find the thing that improves performance 50%. You lift up the cover and you find the thing that does, a series of 1% improvements, and the next thing you know, you're at a critical amount.
That's exactly the philosophy.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about metrics. So, everybody has certain metrics to run their business. What are the key metrics you look for, you use to run, your part of the business, and the kinds of things you want to understand about the company that you work with?
Yeah, it's funny. I'd say two of the three. There are definitely metrics that we're using that are IT specific, and I can talk about those. The ones that maybe don't occur to everybody that aren't IT specific, but certainly other parts of the business would think are important. Maybe they don't realize that there are also important to IT. For me, are like our revenue, our monthly recurring revenue in the case of our business, and our customer retention. The reason why those two are so important is they, coming back to part of our conversation earlier, those things are driving to a large degree they don't just tell us about the health of our business and our current offering, but they're going to shape our decision making on the future of our product. Right? So we're obviously trying to grow a healthy business. If our revenue is increasing and we're retaining customers, that means we're doing the right things to help them solve their problems, and that involves our products and our technology. So we want to keep going down that path. So those metrics, while they're not directly related to IT in every case, and in some cases they certainly are, but that those are definitely like leading indicators of where the technology is headed and products are headed, which are going to shape what we're working on and when. So those are two important metrics. That I'd say metrics that are more specific to IT and how we're executing. One of the biggest indicators of how we're doing is our velocity. We call it our velocity, which is the speed that, again, this work is getting completed. So when we talked about a sprint, which is an agile term, and a sprint is a set period of time, ours are 2 weeks long, where we're going to commit to doing a certain amount of work on a project. That work is measured in points. And points are really tied to requirements and the size of requirements. And when we decide we're going to take on, say, some arbitrary number of points in that sprint, then we're going to want to measure, watch our actuals and see, okay, how, we said we would do this much in 2 weeks. That was our goal, but those blockers came up. We had to punch through them, or we had no blockers, and you know what? This ended up being easier than we thought. So our velocity was Y on that particular sprint. And looking at those numbers over time, you get a good sense of kind of the throughput that you have in the organization or on a particular team. And that really helps us predict more when we have a new feature being requested, or maybe it's a major initiative and we're doing some work to try to estimate how long it's going to take. We can use some of that velocity data to help us predict when we'll be complete with an initiative, or how long we might expect it to take to get the work done. And that's important, obviously, because we need to make commitments to customers, give them an idea of when these products are going to be available, or we're working with other parts of the organization on launching this or rolling this out to customers. There's a whole series of events outside of IT that go into a product launch or a feature launch, as you well know.
Yeah.
And that, knowing when that's coming is important.
Yeah, very cool. I love the idea that you're using business metrics. I mean, I've spoken with CEOs who look at that recurring revenue and customer retention, and I love the idea that those are part of the metrics you use from an IT perspective too. You're right; they're the leading indicator of the use of the product, right, and what we should do. Right, very good.
Right.
So, what do you think? You said you've been here at OutMatch for 6 years. Before that, you described some other jobs. So, over your career, what's the biggest change that you've seen in your career?
Change in what way?
Oh, just change in either how you do your job, or change in the types of companies that exist, or change in the industry in general. What sticks out to you is like, wow, that change is remarkable that it's happened in my lifetime or happened in my career.
Well, I mean, this sounds silly, I guess, but I guess it's off the cuff, but our whole business and so many businesses today, the whole world is built around the internet, right?
Yeah.
And that really evolved in makes me seem really old, I guess, but that really evolved in our time. So
yeah.
When I was working with software in the job that I mentioned before, there was very little SaaS software. Everything was installed software that you might sell it to a company, but it was going to be installed on premise at their facility, and you sold kind of more shrink wrapped software. Nothing was SaaS based, and that running that way has a host of problems and challenges that are different in some ways from running a kind of a cloud or SaaS based business. So that's kind of simplified the problem, I think, a lot. Is running it in the cloud. It's been very transformational to run there. I think building software too, just the amount of knowledge. If you're in the technology space today, the amount of knowledge that's at your fingertips in terms of other people who have encountered problems that you're encountering, whether it's how do I make this work in this kind of environment, or how do I write this piece of code so that I get this functionality, or I've got this firewall change I need to make and I need to know, everything is available online. It's a matter of actually sorting through it to find kind of the right source of that information, one you can trust, and then some good advice. But there's just no shortage of information for technical professionals to go to seek out, which in some ways, just in thinking about it, you asked me who's successful today and who's not. Anyone can Google, how do I solve such and such a problem technically. So when you're hiring and you're really trying to figure out how to separate kind of really good people from maybe mediocre ones, you really have to take them out of that environment and really kind of use techniques to assess their knowledge and experience that don't involve somebody's just ability to search for a solution.
Right? Right. Yeah, there's more intelligence needed than just the ability to search, right? Anybody can do that.
Yeah, for sure. But it certainly is available and it's helpful, and obviously everyone in every field uses that every day. Sure. But it's hosting the software, has been, I guess, in my lifetime, game changing. When I think about the software and technology space as a whole, where in businesses like ours, where we're providing services to customers, it's opened up so many new businesses, that couldn't exist without the cloud and hosting. But it's also kind of just makes it so much easier to rapidly deliver features or fix problems for end users, because you're fixing it in one place and they don't have to worry about deploying all that software into their individual local environment.
Yeah. It's funny because we're in a technology business. That topic is exciting to me, and I could just tell by your voice and the speed with which you just were talking about that, it's exciting to you too. So that's a fun outcome of a question like, what's the biggest change? Because that is really, it seems obvious, but it really has huge impacts across every single company. It's just very exciting to see.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it happened so long ago that now I feel it's kind of a dated answer, but you asked over my career, so that, that at the very beginning of my career, that's the way everything was. Midway through my career, it was probably, like we talked about Agile, right? It used to be there was kind of one way to develop software, and all these new strategies and approaches came out that also changed, how we do that. So there's a lot of ways that the industry's evolved. Now, lately, it's just the plethora of technology options that you have. It's almost daunting. There's just so many different techniques that you can use, or languages, or things that you can use to deliver essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is complicated things, but it is interesting to see how much that's evolved as well.
So so one last question for you for our conversation here. I'm always interested in advice. You obviously are in a specific part of a business, but obviously think very strategically about the business and the metrics you use and the people that you hire and all that. What advice would you give to someone starting their career today?
I don't know, maybe some of the same advice I got. I think the best advice I got really early in my career, and I don't know that this is applicable for everyone, but for me, really, really early, like the first or second year of my career, I got some advice, which was learn 80 to 85% of the job and move on to the next thing. Not necessarily meaning move on to a different job or quit your job, but challenge yourself to not stay in that that space to branch out and ask for additional challenges or additional responsibilities, to find ways to insert yourself in other parts of the organization and learn as much as you can about different parts of running a business than just your specific role. Now, I think there's subject matter experts that it's important that they know 100% or 99, and they're constantly learning and developing expertise in that one area. And that, I don't mean to, in any way advise people not to take that path, because I depend on people who I consider subject matter experts and know that 99 or 100% all day long. They're vital. But for me and kind of my personality and what I like to do, and where I think it's helped me the most and that was just getting exposure to a lot of different parts of, if it's IT, then it's all the different pieces of IT like we just talked about, or if it's the business as a whole, understanding enough about the sales function or the marketing function or the finance function or whatever, so that you can communicate effectively with those people and what their problems are. So that when you're taking those back to technology, to or wherever your particular domain is, you can apply what you know about those areas and some of that learning that you've developed to whatever your job is at that time. So that 80-85% kind of guidance I got from that guy a long time ago. Thank you, whoever that was. But that to me it really forced me to, or encouraged me, I guess, to do that, and to kind of, especially early on, and not kind of be satisfied with any one particular thing, but to keep exploring, and that was valuable.
That's great advice. It's excellent advice for someone early in their career, and frankly, it's excellent advice for someone in the middle or late in their career, right? To explore and stay curious, and that mastery is not, I know 100%, right? So
Yeah, right.
I love that. I love that advice. So yes, thank you to whoever told you that, and thank you for sharing that with us. And thanks for the conversation today. I really appreciate it, and you gave us a lot to think about. So thanks for agreeing to do the podcast, and I can't wait for everybody else to hear it.
Well, sure. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Playbook podcast with our guest, Chris Gardner. If you want to learn more about Chris, the best place to do that is at the OutMatch website and on the OutMatch blog. He's not much for the socials, although you can see him on LinkedIn. If you'd like to listen to other episodes of the Talent Playbook podcast, you can do so at iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, YouTube, on Libsyn, and at the OutMatch website in the Now Streaming menu. So until next time, this is Jason Ferrara saying thanks for listening.